Just a Concerned Citizen by Damos on AO3. Chapter 7 Background Check. Hitoshi rubbed at his tired eyes and slumped over the arm of his couch. Somehow, despite the fact that there were no new developments in the case, Midoriya had dug up another lead in the form of a black market website that the kidnappers may have been using to communicate. He said it probably wasn't nothing, which meant it probably something. And he just wasn't confident of what. And that was after Hitoshi had found him having a breakdown over not making enough progress. He had hoped the conversation would have led to the man not working himself to death, but he was starting to get the feeling he was going to have to start doing wellness checks or something. He sighed, earning him an annoyed glare from his cat, who was curled up on top of the cushion near his head. He really wished he was better at this sort of thing. Sure, he had learned about comforting civilians after tragedies, but that wasn't at all similar to whatever he was trying to do. Trying to convince someone that their life had value, he supposed? He should have known better than to just give him the case like he had. If that had been him, before he got in any help, he would have done anything to make sure he didn't lose that opportunity. Really, Midoriya's response hadn't even been that surprising, which was why his thoughts kept circling around to it. Should have explained it better, or at least started out with a case that I knew he could solve. It wasn't as though he could take it back now, either. Rescinding trust like that would probably wipe out any of the progress he had made, and then some. And as if the situation wasn't already complicated enough, he had gotten the background check that morning. Midoriya Izuku was quirkless. Hitoshi didn't really know what to do with that nugget of information. He had been banking on using the shared experience of having villainous quirks to convince Midoriya that, whatever it was, he was still capable of doing good. But Midoriya didn't have a villainous quirk. He had no quirk. He hadn't had all that many encounters with people that he knew were quirkless, and most of them had not been very good. Generally, he met them on roofs. He knew that quirkless people were treated badly. He knew the data on bullying and murder, on suicide rates, or he had learned it in high school, and was aware that it had only grown worse since. And hell, Midoriya was his age. There was over a 50% chance of him being dead by now. It's no wonder he clung so tightly to the first lifeline he was thrown. But knowing it was bad didn't tell him how it was bad, exactly. He had his own experiences, but being told you would only ever amount to doing evil wasn't exactly the same as being told you would never amount to anything. Or whether it was Midoriya had been told. He was making an assumption on that too. He flung an arm over his face to block out the light from his laptop screen. It was rare that Hitoshi ran across someone who was just so genuinely good, like Midoriya seemed to be. Desperate to please, to do anything to help, without a care for what he was going to get out of it himself. Of course, he was going to help him back, if he could. Someone like Midoriya deserved to live a happier life than it seemed like he had. His own fuck-ups aside, what was important right now was that Midoriya was alive, and that he stayed that way. Usually, he would fall asleep on the couch like this, but the way he flung himself quickly led to an aching form in his back, a sign he should try sleeping in his bed for once. Then, he sat up with a grunt, reaching out to cover his cat's face while giving her a scratch behind the ear. "Don't give me that look," he chided. "I'm setting a good example, or whatever." He spared a glance at his laptop and leaned forward to refresh the page one final time before going to bed. These were active hours for the site, and there were a lot of new jobs, but nothing that caught his eye until the bottom of the page loaded. Whatever that job was, the asking price was 5 times higher than anything else listed right now. Certainly worth looking into, even if it wasn't related to what he was investigating now. It said, "Single, male. Don't worry about my quirk. Just looking to get away for a bit." At first, he frowned. Someone was paying for a hit. Then his eyes scanned at the address. His heart froze in his chest. He knew that place. He'd been there twice. It had been on the background check he read that morning. Good fucking thing he hadn't changed out of his costume yet. Everything sort of happened all at once. Izuku was laying in bed, in a half-asleep daze that he always startled awake from at least once before falling into an actual sleep. Usually it was some wandering through or another that did it, but tonight he was startled awake by the muffled ringtone, a generic one that had come with the phone, from somewhere in the blankets in his bed. He grabbed for a few moments before squinting at the screen. If Mindjack was calling him at 3 a.m., it definitely is important, right? Hello? He answered the phone very intelligently, still not fully certain if he was awake or not. Midoriya. It was Mindjack's voice on the other end, breathless and undeniably worried. Well, he was awake now. You're in danger. Pack a bag and get ready to go. I'm coming for you. Izuku halted himself at his bed and over to the closet, reaching for a duffel bag he used when he would go visit his mom. Okay, I... Then there was a sudden sound of shattering glass from across the room, and his voice dropped to a shaky whisper. I think there's someone in the fire escape. He yelped as something flew by him in the dark, sinking to the wall behind him with a solid thunk. Then another projectile whippled by, slicing his arm as he instinctively raised them to the noise. Suddenly, everything was washed out in faded yellow lights as someone flicked a switch. There were 2 men in his apartment. One had arms covered with thick, red, plastic-like scales. The other was missing 2 fingers and brandishing a hunting knife. Oh, Izuku said, because he recognized them. You guys killed a woman last week, didn't you? Tama Ekoto's ex-wife? That was the stupidest thing to say, but for some reason, under threats of death, that's what came out. He didn't even have an actual proof, just a blurry photo and some trashy tabloids talking about how cut up the corpse had been. Maybe his would match up, and they'd be able to connect the 2 deaths. The man with the knife laughed, rough and harsh in a way that made Izuku worry that he had some kind of fluid in his lung, and grinned. Well, damn, now we've got to kill you for sure. Well, this is bad. Obviously, people breaking into his apartment with the intent to kill wasn't ever going to be good, but on top of that, he also cornered himself. He had been in a similar enough situation enough times to know his best shot of survival lay in getting into as public of a place as possible and hoping the attackers lost their nerve. He let out a cry as something cut him from behind. The red scale, embedded in the wall, flew back to the man's arm, getting a new cut as it went. Though it's not a projectile quirk, but a boomerang. One he probably doesn't have perfect control over, considering I'm still alive and conscious. A plan formed in his mind, half-baked and probably bad, and the only thing he had right now, Mindjack, was saying something on the phone, his name, some curses, begging for him to say something. Not as relevant right now as him staying alive. He blatantly reached back for his hand, grabbing a fistful of fabric from the closet. Winter clothes, mostly. It didn't matter. He ripped them off their hangers and threw it at the men, using the moment it brought him to duck around to the side, trying to get past them. It wasn't enough. A hand closed around his wrist and yanked him backwards. In a panic, he swung his other fist towards the man, only for it to collide with the plates on the other arm and bloody knuckles. With no option left, he kicked at whatever he could reach, and was rewarded when his knee hit something soft. The man cursed, his grip loosened enough for Izuku to yank himself free and stumble forward. And it was quite the stumble. He had really lost so much blood that he was already dizzy? No, probably not. There was a ringing in his ear that probably had something to do with the other man's quirk, though he didn't dare spare a glance backwards to check. Instead, he kept moving forwards towards past the door, which he knew would take too long to unlock and open, and crossed the room to where the floor was covered in shards of glass. He had hoped that his socks would be enough to keep his feet from getting too cut up, as he stumbled drunkenly to the window frame and pulled himself onto the fire escape. A scale sunk itself into the other shoulder, but he hardly broke stride. He had been stabbed worse than that in middle school. The ringing in his ear got a little better once he was outside. Not that he would have been able to stop if it hadn't. The fire escape was old and rusty, and he probably had glass in his feet, but he ran towards the steps anyways. He was down a floor before there was a sound of something snapping, and there was suddenly a hole in the gate of the floor in front of him. And no, wow, either this fire escape is really crappy, or those scales are super powerful. He hesitated for a moment before stepping over it and moving. It would probably be best if he kept them trying to use range attacks, because if either man tried to outrun him right now, they would probably win. He was down 2 more stories before he realized that they were having some kind of muffled conversation above him, and then the entire fire escape started to vibrate and ring, and he fell to his hands and knees. Well, that was neat. It must be some kind of quirk that lets him vibrate metal. He probably had practice with a knife to make that disorientating tone. He blinked and watched the rust flake off the nearby rattling to settle on his hands. At least it would wake up his neighbors. Probably. There was another clang as the scale ripped through the level above and just caught the edge of his hand. He blinked at it, and at the phone, where a call with Mindjack was still ongoing. He was hearing this, right? The fire escape shook with another loud vibration as someone with heavy boots started moving around above him, the tone warping with every step. He dragged himself to his knees, then shakily back to his feet, before staggering down the next set of stairs, and the next, until he stood at the ladder. The thing was unreliable looking at the best of times, and had already come loose at the bottom, leaving scratch marks on the top of the dumpster that had been illegally moved beneath it. Izuku tucked his phone under his chin and started climbing down, only for another scale to come scaling through to sever one of the ladders from its bases, sending it spinning wildly to the side. Before the metal could buckle under his own weight, Izuku let go, grunting as he impacted the lid of the dumpster, but immediately glad it was there to break his fall. He stumbled off the bin and onto the ground, as another scale pinned him to the lid. It was plastic, though. It should have gone through no problem, unless he was getting fatigue. Or maybe the power gets down after a certain range. That would explain why he didn't just rip through my shoulder earlier. That in the middle, he started hobbling down the alley and into the street. It was late enough that no one would be out, but he could at least get in range of security cameras, somewhere. He limped as fast as he could. He hadn't actually been able to slow them down. Hopefully they would at least struggle with the ladder. He paused, risking a glance backwards as there was a series of shouts and thumps behind him, breath catching as he realized what had happened. The man with the knife was hanging over the side of the fire escape, wrapped firmly in what looked like a long bandage. The man with the red scales was standing stock still in the middle of the one in the stairs skirt, staring blankly at the man who perched at the railing and panting for breath. Izuku let himself collapse to the ground, watching for a moment as the mind-controlled man turned around and started robotically walking down the fire escape. A hero was here. He was going to be all right. His feet weren't actually in that bad of a shape, all things considered. He'd be limping for a while, but nothing too bad. The cut on his hand, and he realized with a grinner touch, his face, weren't really worth mentioning. The wounds on his shoulders weren't good, but he'd treated worse on himself before. If he could get to his first aid kit, he could at least patch things up before passing out. He was suddenly feeling very exhausted. He watched, though he didn't really comprehend, as the man with red scales somehow maneuvered down the broken ladder to the ground. The man with the disorientating quirk was lowered to hang a few inches off the ground before a knife was taken to the capture weapon and he fell through the remaining space, hitting the ground with a solid thump. Take your friend to the street and wait for the police to arrest you. A voice came from behind them, sounding as tense as he ever heard it. Mind Jack's voice. Izuku's eyes strayed down to the bloody hand, where the call was still ongoing. He blinked and hung up. If something happened now, he could just yell. Midoriya, are you? Mind Jack's voice was closer, this time, the emotion in it now sounding something closer to concern. When Izuku looked up, it was to see the man crouching next to him, eyes furrowed, one hand reaching out to him but froze in place. Are you okay? Can I check your wounds? What? Oh, yeah, I guess. I'm fine though, just a little scratched up. His brain was already pretty scrambled from everything that had just happened. Mind Jack taking his face in one hand and, oh, so gently tilting it to one side really only served to muddle things more. Izuku suddenly found that his voice was an octave higher. It's not a big deal, I promise. I'm fine. Fine. You survived someone taking a hit on you. And you're fine? Mind Jack sounded worried now. He took a moment to look upwards at nothing, but his eyes looked softer when he looked back down. You know, I'm believing that you're secretly a vigilante more and more every day. I'm not, Izuku spurtled, fiddling with the fact that someone had paid to have him killed into the I'm dealing with that later, maybe never box. I'm pretty sure that everything I did resides pretty firmly under self-defense. Probably. Can you stand? He nods, but as soon as he pushes himself to his feet, he squawks and slinks back down to his knees, earning himself a weirdly concerned gaze from the pro-hero. I, stepped on glass. Sorry? He looked down at his bloody streaked knees, suddenly realizing the situation he was on. He was wasting a pro-hero's time, but having to be saved. His face was suddenly burning red with shame, eyes hot with unshedded tears. Sorry, was all he could say. Midoriya. He couldn't bring himself to look at the hero, earning a small sigh. Oh, great. Just annoy him more. Don't blame yourself for being a victim, alright? Fuck. If anything, I should be apologizing to you for getting you into this mess. There was a moment of silence, then the sound of a police siren blaring just for a second. Mind Jack hissed out something too soft to be heard, and then Izuku found a hand on his shoulder again. Okay, this is the conversation we're gonna have later. Right now, I'm gonna get you back to your apartment. You're going to tell me what you need packed, and then I'm gonna get you the fuck out of here, and to a clinic before someone else can take the job, alright? Izuku swiped at his eyes and nodded, then let out a very undignified noise as the pro-hero's capture weapon looped around him and pulled him into his back. It'll be easier if you hold on. Izuku did loop his arms around the pro-hero's neck, after a moment's hesitation. The way he was wrapped up, he didn't think he could fall if he wanted to, but it was more comfortable, if not incredibly embarrassing. Then his stomach dropped out from under him as Mind Jack used the rest of his capture weapon to swing up several stories, with only a grunt of effort. He had no trouble finding his apartment, at least with the broken window and dozens of holes in the metal mesh of the fire escape outside. He was placed on his bed and did his best to direct Mind Jack to everything he could think of that was important. His laptop, the stuff for the case, immediately pulled down from the board and back onto its folder. His notebooks, which Mind Jack thankfully did not question, all the while the pro was distractingly sending texts. To the police. He explained at Izuku's questioning look. I did leave 2 hitmen for them to pick up without much explanation. I'm going to stop by and talk to them on the way out. Other than that, Izuku figured he should bring some toiletries and that was really it, wasn't it? He gingerly slipped his feet into his shoes and handed the pro a few sets of clothes from the dresser next to his bed. but with the exception of the furniture and a small few things, he had all but moved out. That felt weird. Sad. Almost if it weren't for the fact that he lived that way on purpose. I have a first aid supplied in the bathroom, too. We probably don't need to go to a clinic. It's not that bad. Mind Jack cast him a withering glance and looped the capture weapon around him again without warning. The fact that you think that's not bad doesn't exactly inspire confidence in me. I'm taking you to a clinic. Well, that tone didn't exactly leave any room for him to argue. So instead, he just wrapped his arms around the pro hero's neck, again, and let himself be carried. This time, Mind Jack didn't swing down, one of his arms occupied by the duffel bag as it was, but walked down the fire escape rather normally, only making the final leaps from the end of the fire escape to the dumpster and the ground. Izuku was jostled, but he didn't really register it, quickly finding himself flagged now that everything was over. Was it weird that he also felt safe right now, after he had almost been murdered? Maybe. Maybe not, considering he was currently swung over the back of a pro hero who had saved him. He tried to pay attention as they got out of the alley, and Mind Jack talked to the police. He caught a few words: hitman, attempted murder, clinic, safe house, before he slipped into a dreamless sleep. It got real. Shit got real in this chapter. We really turned it up a notch. We really, really did. Would you look at that? So, Izuku got hitmaned, and also, Hitoshi found out that Izuku is quirkless, and Hitoshi's first reaction is, well, fuck, I thought he had a villainous quirk. How am I gonna relate to him? How do I relate to that? You know? And it's also sad that most of the quirkless people he has met happen to be on rooftops. Because, and just him being alive at his age, yeah, no, that's beating all the statistics. Especially considering the statistics that I have for the streamiverse. Let's just say a quirkless person living that long is very, very low. Very, very low. Like, unless you're super rich or you're already old and you weren't really, like, in the generation of, like, true quirkism, right? Then, yeah, no. It's, truly something, But yeah, we are getting serious now, aren't we? So what do you guys think? Izuku got attacked. Isn't that nice? Isn't that cool? Safe house? Clinic? Izuku undermining his own well-being once again? Will things ever change? Will it forever stay the same? Alright, that's all I have to say for now. As always, my raindrops, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds. Have a wonderful day or night. Link to my Discord server and socials are down in the description. Subscribe to see more of my content, and thank you so much for watching.